Hello everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
My US house had no gate. Have you ever looked at something so ordinary that it quietly changed the way you saw your entire life? That happened to me on a calm morning in the United States. I wasn't looking for a life lesson. I wasn't trying to become braver. I was simply standing in front of my own house, holding a warm cup of coffee, when I suddenly realized something that made my heart beat faster. My home had no gate. No tall fence. No heavy metal door separating my family from the street. At first, that tiny detail didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a mistake. And what happened only a few days later completely changed the meaning of safety, trust, and even the way I learned English. Stay with me until the end of this story, because the biggest surprise wasn't the house, it was me. My name is Emma, and this is a true chapter of my everyday life in America. Every morning I wake up before the rest of my family, make a simple breakfast, and enjoy the peaceful silence outside my front door. Birds sing from the trees. Friendly neighbors walk their dogs with relaxed smiles. Children ride bicycles along the sidewalk without anyone shouting warnings every few seconds. Everything looks calm, almost too calm. Then one morning, while watering the flowers in my front yard, I finally noticed what had been hiding in plain sight. There was no gate protecting my house. The grass stretched naturally toward the sidewalk, creating no clear border between public space and my family's home. I stood there for several minutes, wondering why nobody seemed worried. Back where I had once imagined a house should always have a gate, the idea of leaving everything so open felt impossible. My first thought was simple: isn't this dangerous? That question stayed in my mind all day. I checked the front door twice before bedtime. I looked through the window every time I heard a passing car. I even imagined strangers walking across my lawn in the middle of the night. My husband smiled gently when he noticed my nervous habits. "You'll get used to it," he said quietly. "People here respect each other's space." I wanted to believe him, but believing something and feeling it are two completely different things. Isn't that true? Sometimes our minds understand long before our hearts do. As the days passed, I continued my small English practice every morning. I liked reading short stories aloud because the slow rhythm helped me improve my pronunciation. One sentence stayed with me longer than the others: trust grows through small experiences. At first it was only another English sentence to practice. Then I realized it described my own life perfectly. Every smile from a passing neighbor, every friendly wave, every package left safely on a front porch without disappearing became another small lesson. I wasn't just learning new vocabulary. I was learning a different way of thinking. Modern psychology suggests that our brains naturally pay more attention to possible danger than to ordinary safety. Scientists call this the negativity bias. It once helped humans survive, but today it often causes unnecessary fear. I could feel that happening inside me. My imagination created problems that reality never did. Even so, one quiet afternoon, something unexpected happened right in front of my open yard. A stranger slowly walked toward my house, looked directly at my front door, and stopped. My heart froze. I had no idea whether I should smile, wave, or quietly step back inside. What happened next completely changed the way I understood freedom, and I never looked at my home the same way again. The stranger walked closer. The moment a stranger stopped in front of my open yard, every scary story my imagination had ever created came rushing back at once. My fingers tightened around my coffee mug. My heartbeat became louder than the birds outside. I wanted to believe my husband had been right about trust, but in that single moment, fear felt much more convincing than kindness. I had no idea that the next 5 minutes would completely change how I viewed my neighborhood, my family, and even the way I practiced English every single day. I stayed completely still behind the living room window, watching the man carefully. He wasn't dressed like someone in a hurry. He wore a blue baseball cap, comfortable jeans, and carried a small brown envelope in one hand. Instead of walking directly to my front door, he paused beside the flower bed and looked around quietly. My imagination immediately started writing its own dramatic story. Why was he looking at my yard? Was he checking whether anyone was home? Was he planning to come back later? It amazed me how quickly the human brain could invent danger without a single piece of evidence. Then something unexpected happened. The man bent down, picked up an empty plastic bottle that had rolled near the sidewalk after a windy afternoon, placed it into a recycling bag he carried with him, smiled softly, and continued walking toward my porch. My shoulders relaxed for a second, but only for a second. He still knocked gently on my front door. I opened it slowly. "Good morning," he said with a warm smile. "I think this letter was accidentally delivered to my house." He held out the envelope. It wasn't even his responsibility, but he had walked several houses just to return my family's mail. I thanked him, and he laughed kindly. "It happens sometimes. We all help each other around here." That sentence stayed with me long after he walked away. We all help each other around here. There was no long speech. No dramatic lesson. Just one ordinary sentence spoken by an ordinary neighbor on an ordinary morning. Yet it quietly challenged every fearful assumption I had carried inside. Later that afternoon, while preparing lunch, I opened my English reading notebook. I enjoy reading slowly because every sentence teaches me not only vocabulary but also another way of thinking. That day's expression was simple: don't judge too quickly. I read it aloud several times, paying attention to each word. Suddenly, it wasn't just an English lesson anymore. It had become the perfect description of my own morning. Psychologists explain that our brains often rely on rapid judgments because they once helped humans survive dangerous environments. This mental shortcut, sometimes called the first impression effect, protects us in emergencies. But it can also make us misunderstand perfectly kind people. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my fear had never come from my neighborhood. It had come from the stories I silently told myself. Over the next few days, I noticed things I had ignored before. Delivery drivers placed packages neatly beside front doors without rushing away nervously. Children waved at neighbors they barely knew by name. People smiled while walking their dogs, and many greeted each other with a cheerful, "Good morning." Even simple conversations became wonderful listening practice. I found myself repeating those everyday phrases softly after returning home, improving my pronunciation without feeling like I was studying. Little by little, the missing gate outside my house stopped looking strange. Instead, I began wondering whether invisible gates still surrounded my own heart. Then, just as I started feeling comfortable, my husband came home one evening with unexpected news. "Our next-door neighbor invited us over for dinner tomorrow," he said. I smiled at first. Then he added one sentence that made me pause. "She has something important she wants to tell us about this neighborhood." For the first time since moving into this peaceful community, I couldn't decide whether I should feel excited or worried. Dinner without locked doors. I expected an ordinary dinner with friendly neighbors. Instead, one simple conversation made me question everything I believed about safety, family, and freedom in America. Before that evening, I thought a peaceful neighborhood stayed peaceful because people built stronger fences. I was completely wrong. What my next-door neighbor shared over homemade food sounded almost unbelievable at first, yet by the end of the night, I found myself looking at my own front door in a way I never had before. The biggest surprise wasn't what she told me. It was what happened after we walked back home. The next evening, my husband and I carried a small homemade apple pie across the street. It felt almost funny that we simply walked through the front yard without opening or closing a single gate. The neighborhood looked exactly as calm as always. Children laughed while riding scooters. A golden retriever rested on a front porch without a leash. Someone watered flowers while chatting with another neighbor across the sidewalk. Everything seemed so open that I still wondered how it all worked. Our neighbor, Sarah, welcomed us with a warm smile before we even reached her porch. "I'm so happy you came," she said. Her house looked comfortable rather than perfect. Family photos covered one wall. A bookshelf stood beside the fireplace. Fresh bread filled the kitchen with a wonderful smell that instantly made everyone feel relaxed. There was nothing expensive or impressive about the room. What impressed me was how peaceful everyone looked. During dinner, we talked about gardening, local schools, weather, and weekend farmers markets. I listened carefully because these everyday conversations became wonderful English listening practice. Native speakers didn't rush. They smiled, paused naturally, and used simple expressions that were much easier to understand than many textbook recordings. One sentence caught my attention immediately. "We don't just live next to each other," Sarah said. "We look out for each other." I quietly repeated those words in my mind. Look out for each other. It was a new English expression, but its meaning felt deeper than vocabulary. It described an entire way of living. Seeing my curiosity, Sarah smiled. "You asked yesterday why most houses here don't have gates," she said. "People think it's because we're not careful. Actually, it's because we're connected." She explained that neighbors shared phone numbers, checked on elderly residents during storms, collected packages when families traveled, and even helped children safely cross the street after school. Technology also played a role. Many homes had smart doorbell cameras, neighborhood apps, and local community groups that allowed everyone to communicate quickly if something unusual happened. Research in community psychology has shown that neighborhoods with strong social trust often experience greater cooperation and a stronger sense of safety because people naturally notice and support one another. Listening to Sarah, I realized that trust wasn't the absence of protection. It was simply a different kind of protection. On our walk home, I noticed something small but unforgettable. Several porch lights turned on automatically as the evening grew darker. Soft golden light spread across the sidewalks. Families waved goodnight from their driveways. No one seemed afraid. For the first time since moving into this house, I didn't feel nervous walking across my own front yard. Then my husband smiled and asked me, "Do you still think we need a gate?" I looked toward our open lawn and quietly shook my head. "I think I needed new eyes more than a new fence," I answered. He laughed gently. But just as we reached our front porch, we both stopped. A small gift bag had been placed carefully beside our door. There was no name. No note. Just a blue ribbon tied neatly across the top. I looked at my husband. He looked at me. Neither of us had any idea who had left it, or why. The gift waiting at my door. A mysterious gift appeared on my front porch without a name, without a message, and without anyone ringing the doorbell. Just days earlier, that simple sight would have filled me with fear. But something inside me had already begun to change. I stood there under the soft evening light, staring at the blue ribbon wrapped around the small gift bag, wondering whether I was about to discover another reason people in this American neighborhood trusted each other so deeply. What I found inside didn't cost much money, but it carried a lesson I will never forget. For a few seconds, neither my husband nor I moved. The neighborhood was almost silent except for crickets singing and a distant child laughing somewhere down the street. I picked up the bag carefully and looked around. There was no one nearby. No parked car waiting. No hidden camera playing a joke. Just quiet streets and warm porch lights glowing across the neighborhood. "Should we open it?" I asked. My husband smiled. "I think that's exactly why it was left here." We stepped inside and placed the bag on our kitchen table. My curiosity grew stronger with every second. Slowly, I untied the ribbon and opened the bag. Inside was a freshly baked loaf of banana bread, still carrying the sweet smell of cinnamon. Beneath it lay a handwritten card. It simply said, "Welcome to the neighborhood. We're happy you're here." There was no signature. Only a tiny drawing of a smiling house. I couldn't help smiling back. The kindness felt so simple that it almost brought tears to my eyes. No one expected anything in return. No one wanted attention. Someone had quietly chosen generosity over recognition. The next morning, while walking outside with my coffee, I finally solved the mystery. An elderly woman watering flowers across the street smiled warmly. "I hope you enjoyed the bread," she said. I laughed. "So it was you?" She nodded. We've welcomed every new family that way for nearly 20 years. Her answer surprised me even more than the gift itself. 20 years. Not because a rule required it. Not because anyone received a reward. Simply because kindness had become part of the neighborhood's culture. Later that afternoon, I opened my English notebook again. One expression immediately caught my attention. Pay it forward. I practiced saying it several times. At first, I only focused on pronunciation. Then I looked up its meaning. Doing something kind for another person without expecting anything back, hoping they will one day help someone else. Suddenly, the mysterious gift made perfect sense. Researchers studying positive psychology have found that both giving and receiving unexpected acts of kindness increase feelings of trust, belonging, and emotional well-being. Some studies even suggest these moments encourage people to become kinder themselves, creating a chain reaction throughout communities. Sitting at my kitchen table, I realized I wasn't just improving my English vocabulary anymore. I was learning values hidden inside everyday expressions. That evening, my husband asked me a simple question. What do you want to do next? Without thinking very long, I answered. I want to bake something. He laughed. For us? I shook my head. For someone else. The following Saturday, we baked chocolate chip cookies with our children. They carefully placed each cookie into a small paper box while asking who would receive them. I smiled because I honestly didn't know yet. Sometimes kindness begins before you even know its destination. As we walked toward another family's porch, carrying our little surprise, I felt lighter than I had since moving into this house. The missing gate no longer represented uncertainty. It represented possibility. But just as I bent down to place the cookies beside the front door, I noticed something unusual taped quietly to the mailbox. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was a bright yellow notice from the neighborhood association. And the first line instantly erased the smile from my face. Community safety meeting, attendance strongly recommended. I suddenly wondered whether this peaceful neighborhood was hiding a story no one had told us yet. The meeting that changed my mind. The bright yellow notice on the mailbox stayed in my thoughts all weekend. Community safety meeting, attendance strongly recommended. Those words sounded far more serious than the warm smiles, homemade bread, and friendly conversations I had experienced since moving into this neighborhood. For the first time, I wondered if everyone had been hiding an uncomfortable truth behind their kindness. Was the neighborhood really as safe as it looked, or was I about to discover why people suddenly wanted everyone together? I walked into that meeting expecting bad news. I walked out carrying a completely different understanding of what real security means. On Tuesday evening, my husband and I walked to the neighborhood clubhouse just before sunset. Families arrived carrying folding chairs. Children played tag on the grass while adults greeted each other by first name. The atmosphere felt more like a community picnic than an emergency meeting, yet the yellow notice had made everyone curious. I quietly took a seat near the back of the room. The neighborhood association president, a calm woman named Linda, welcomed everyone with a smile. "Thank you for coming," she began. "Tonight isn't about fear. It's about staying connected." Her first sentence immediately surprised me. Instead of discussing crime statistics or frightening stories, she spoke about communication. She encouraged neighbors to exchange phone numbers, check on elderly residents during extreme weather, report broken streetlights quickly, and help families traveling on vacation by collecting packages from their porches. Then she showed something I had never noticed before. A simple neighborhood phone app. Residents used it to report lost pets, recommend local businesses, warn about icy sidewalks in winter, and let others know if someone needed help after surgery or illness. "This," Linda said while holding up her phone, "is our strongest fence." The room filled with gentle laughter. I laughed too. It suddenly made perfect sense. The neighborhood wasn't protected by walls. It was protected by relationships. During a short break, several neighbors introduced themselves. One family invited us to a summer barbecue. Another recommended a nearby farmer's market with fresh local produce every Saturday morning. Nobody asked personal questions. Nobody judged us. They simply included us as though we had always belonged. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about one English phrase Linda had repeated several times. Stay connected. Such a simple expression. Only 2 words. Yet they carried enormous meaning. The next morning, I added it to my English notebook and practiced saying it slowly while making breakfast. Learning English through real experiences felt completely different from memorizing vocabulary lists. Every new phrase now carried a memory, a face, and an emotion. That made it almost impossible to forget. Social psychologists have long found that communities with stronger social connections often recover more quickly from challenges because trust encourages cooperation before problems become crises. I realized that confidence doesn't always come from adding more locks to your door. Sometimes it comes from knowing someone will answer your phone call when you need help. As the weeks passed, my children also began changing. Instead of staying indoors, they rode bicycles with neighborhood friends, laughed in front yards, and came home full of stories. Watching them made me smile because they seemed completely comfortable in a place that had once made me nervous. One afternoon my daughter looked at me and asked a question I wasn't expecting. "Mom, why don't we have a gate?" A month earlier, I would have answered very differently. Now I smiled. Because sometimes the strongest protection isn't something you build around your home, I said. It's something you build with the people around you. She nodded as if the answer were perfectly obvious. Then, just before dinner, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the neighborhood app. Someone had posted a photo taken only minutes earlier. A small child had wandered away from a nearby playground. Within seconds, dozens of neighbors were already searching together. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. I had no idea that the next hour would become the greatest test of everything I had learned about trust, community, and what an open neighborhood truly means. Everyone started searching. One phone notification turned a peaceful evening into a race against time. A little child had disappeared from a nearby playground, and within minutes, the entire neighborhood moved as if it were one big family. Nobody waited for someone else to act. Nobody asked whether it was their responsibility. They simply stepped outside and started searching. Standing in my front yard with my car keys in one hand and my phone in the other, I suddenly understood something that no fence, no gate, and no security system had ever been able to teach me. Real safety begins the moment strangers decide they care about each other. I quickly joined the neighborhood search group through the community app. Messages appeared every few seconds. I'll check the walking trail. I'm searching near the park. We're covering Maple Street. The coordination amazed me. There was no panic. Only calm teamwork. My husband searched the streets on foot while I slowly drove through nearby neighborhoods, keeping my eyes on sidewalks, playgrounds, and bus stops. The sunset painted the sky with soft orange light, but no one seemed to notice the beautiful view. Every person was focused on finding one frightened little child. As I drove, I remembered something Linda had said during the safety meeting. Connected communities respond faster than fearful communities. Now I was watching her words become reality. About 20 minutes later, another notification appeared. Child found safe near the community library. I immediately pulled my car over and let out a deep breath I didn't realize I had been holding. The comments below the message filled with relief. Thank you, everyone. So glad she's safe. Great teamwork. No one asked for credit. No one tried to become the hero. The victory belonged to everyone. When I returned home, my children were waiting at the front window. Did they find her? My son asked. Yes, I smiled. She's safe. The relief on his face reminded me that children notice much more than adults sometimes realize. They don't only watch what we say. They watch how we care. Later that evening, while practicing my English reading aloud, I came across a sentence that suddenly carried a much deeper meaning. We are stronger together. I read it slowly several times. The pronunciation mattered. But the feeling mattered even more. Learning English through real-life experiences had become surprisingly natural. Instead of memorizing isolated vocabulary, I connected every new phrase with a moment I had actually lived. Researchers in educational psychology often describe this as contextual learning, showing that people remember language more effectively when words are connected to meaningful experiences and emotions. Looking back, I realized I hadn't simply expanded my vocabulary. I had built memories that made those words impossible to forget. The following morning, I walked outside with my coffee as usual. Everything looked peaceful again. Children waited for school buses. Neighbors waved while walking their dogs. Delivery trucks quietly stopped in front of houses. Life had returned to normal. Or perhaps I had finally begun to understand what normal looked like here. My open front yard no longer felt exposed. It felt welcoming. The missing gate that once frightened me had become almost invisible because I no longer measured safety by barriers. I measured it by faces I recognized and people I trusted. Just before I went back inside, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a community alert. It was a private message from Sarah. "Can you come over this afternoon?" she wrote. "I want to show you something about this neighborhood that almost nobody notices." I smiled with curiosity. After everything I had already experienced, I couldn't imagine what could possibly surprise me anymore. I would soon discover I was completely wrong. Edit. The secret of the open yards. I thought I had already discovered the secret of this neighborhood. I thought it was kindness, community apps, and friendly neighbors. But when Sarah sent me that message, "I want to show you something that almost nobody notices," my curiosity exploded. What could possibly be hiding in a neighborhood where houses had no gates, children played freely, and people left homemade bread on each other's porches? I walked to her house expecting a small surprise. Instead, she showed me something so simple and so powerful that I suddenly understood why this place felt different from any neighborhood I had ever known. That afternoon was warm and quiet. The air smelled of cut grass and summer flowers. Sarah met me outside instead of inviting me in. "We're taking a walk," she said with a mysterious smile. We started walking slowly down the street. At first, I saw nothing unusual. The same open lawns. The same porches. The same trees casting long shadows across the sidewalk. "Look carefully," Sarah said. I looked harder. Then I noticed it. Almost every front yard connected visually to the next one. There were no tall walls blocking the view. People sitting on porches could easily notice a child, a visitor, a delivery, or someone who needed help. The openness was not an accident. It was a design. Urban planners call this natural surveillance, Sarah explained. When people can see each other, they tend to care for each other more. I had never thought about neighborhoods that way. She pointed to a house across the street. "Mrs. Carter is 82. 3 different neighbors can see her front porch from their kitchens. If something seems wrong, someone notices quickly." Then she pointed to the playground at the end of the block. Parents don't need to stand beside their children every second because many adults can see that area from their homes. Suddenly, the open yards stopped looking empty. They looked connected. Researchers in environmental psychology have found that neighborhoods designed with visibility, walkability, and shared spaces often encourage more social interaction and a stronger sense of belonging. I wasn't just living in a place without gates. I was living in a place intentionally built to reduce isolation. As we continued walking, Sarah asked me, "Do you know what changed the most for me after moving here years ago?" I shook my head. I stopped feeling like I had to protect myself from everyone. Her words hit me deeply because I realized I had been doing exactly that, even without noticing. On the way back, we passed a little free library, a small wooden box filled with books that neighbors could borrow and return anytime. I smiled immediately. "This is perfect for English practice," I said. Sarah laughed. "Take one." I chose a short novel with simple language and read the first sentence aloud. "Home is where people see you." I paused. The sentence felt almost too perfect for that moment. That evening, after dinner, I sat on my front porch reading the book while my children played nearby. For the first time, I wasn't checking the street every few seconds. I wasn't imagining danger behind every passing car. I was simply present. Then something unexpected happened. A police car slowly entered our street and stopped directly in front of our house. My heart skipped. The officer stepped out, looked at our open yard, and began walking toward me. I closed my book. For one brief second, every old fear came rushing back. Had something happened? Was there a problem with our house? Or was this peaceful neighborhood about to reveal a completely different side of itself? The officer reached my porch, smiled politely, and said, "Ma'am, I need to ask you about something that was reported this evening." I suddenly realized this story was not over yet. The police officer smiled first. When a police car stopped directly in front of my house, my heart immediately imagined the worst. My children stopped playing. I slowly stood up from the porch, still holding the English novel I had borrowed from the little free library. For one long second, every fear I thought I had left behind quietly returned. But what happened next surprised me more than the missing gate ever had. That unexpected conversation became the final piece of a lesson I didn't even realize I was still learning, and it completely changed the way I would see this neighborhood forever. The officer walked toward me with a calm expression. "Good evening, ma'am," he said politely. "I'm Officer Martinez." I smiled nervously. "Is everything okay?" He nodded. "Yes, everything is fine." A neighbor called because they noticed a bicycle lying near the sidewalk for quite a while. They were worried a child might have been hurt. I looked toward the front yard. My son's bicycle was still lying exactly where he had left it after running inside for a glass of water. I couldn't help laughing softly. "I'm so sorry," I said. "He's perfectly safe." Officer Martinez smiled. "I thought that might be the case. We just wanted to make sure." That was it. No accusations. No tension. No drama. Just someone checking because another neighbor cared enough to make a phone call. As the officer prepared to leave, he said something that stayed with me long after his patrol car disappeared around the corner. "We'd rather respond to 10 situations that turn out fine than miss the one that truly needs help." Those words echoed in my mind for the rest of the evening. After dinner, I opened my English notebook and wrote down a new sentence. "It's better to care than to assume." I read it aloud several times. Each repetition felt less like language practice and more like personal advice. The next morning, Sarah stopped by while walking her dog. "I heard about the police visit," she said with a smile. I laughed before she could continue. "So everyone knows already?" She nodded. "Not because people gossip. Because people care." That single sentence explained something I had struggled to understand since the first day I noticed our house had no gate. Openness wasn't the opposite of safety. Openness encouraged awareness. Researchers studying neighborhood design often describe how communities with regular social interaction tend to recognize unusual situations more quickly because residents naturally pay attention to one another. I finally understood that the greatest security system in our neighborhood wasn't hidden inside expensive technology. It was ordinary people. People waving good morning. People returning lost mail. People baking welcome bread. People searching for missing children. People calling simply because a bicycle looked unusual. As autumn slowly arrived, golden leaves covered the sidewalks outside our house. Every morning I practiced reading English on the front porch while enjoying the cool air. Sometimes neighbors stopped to chat for a few minutes. Those conversations became my favorite listening exercises because they were real, relaxed, and full of everyday expressions that no textbook could truly teach. Without realizing it, my confidence had changed too. I no longer checked the front window every time someone walked past. I no longer imagined danger hiding behind ordinary moments. Instead, I had started expecting kindness. One Saturday afternoon, while my family decorated pumpkins for a neighborhood fall festival, my daughter quietly sat beside me. "Mom," she asked, "do you remember when you wanted a big gate?" I smiled. "I do. Do you still want one?" I looked across our open yard where neighbors laughed together, children chased falling leaves, and families shared homemade desserts. "No," I answered softly. "I think the biggest gate was never outside our house." She tilted her head. "Where was it?" I gently placed my hand over my heart. "Right here." She smiled without saying another word. Then my phone vibrated with a new neighborhood message. This time, it wasn't asking for help. It was an invitation. Annual Open Yard Day, every family is welcome. Leave your front yard open and come meet your neighbors. I smiled. But I had no idea that what would happen during that celebration would become the happiest memory my family had ever made in this neighborhood. The day every yard stayed open. I thought I already knew what an open neighborhood looked like. I was wrong. When the annual Open Yard Day finally arrived, every family on our street left their front yards open, placed chairs on the grass, shared homemade food, and welcomed anyone who wanted to stop by. There were no invitations at the door, no expensive decorations, and no perfect houses to impress strangers. Yet by sunset, I experienced one unforgettable moment that completely changed the meaning of the word home. What happened that afternoon still makes me smile every time I walk outside with my morning coffee. The crisp autumn air carried the smell of apple pie, cinnamon, and grilled hamburgers. Colorful pumpkins decorated front porches while children ran from one yard to another collecting stickers for a neighborhood game. Soft music played somewhere down the street, and laughter floated through the cool breeze. I placed homemade cookies on a small table in our front yard. Only a few months earlier, I would have worried about leaving food outside or inviting unfamiliar people to stop by. Now I found myself waving happily to families I recognized. Some neighbors brought fresh lemonade. Others shared homemade soup, warm bread, and seasonal desserts. Nobody hurried. Nobody stayed behind closed doors. Everyone seemed to understand that this afternoon wasn't about showing off beautiful houses. It was about opening hearts. Sarah walked over carrying a basket filled with apples. "Welcome to your first open yard day," she smiled. "I finally understand why everyone loves this neighborhood," I replied. She laughed. "It isn't the houses. I know. It's the people." Throughout the afternoon, I enjoyed dozens of short conversations. They became my favorite English listening practice without feeling like a lesson at all. "How have you been? Would you like another cookie? Your garden looks beautiful. Have a wonderful weekend." Simple expressions. Natural pronunciation. Real smiles. Language felt alive because it belonged to everyday life instead of a classroom. Educational researchers often explain that frequent, low-pressure conversations help language learners build confidence faster because the brain connects vocabulary with positive emotional experiences rather than stress. Looking around, I realized I wasn't trying to study English anymore. I was simply living. Then something happened that quietly touched everyone. An elderly widower named Mr. Thompson slowly walked onto our street carrying a homemade cherry pie. Since losing his wife 2 years earlier, he rarely joined neighborhood events. Without anyone saying a word, several children ran toward him. A family brought him a chair. Someone poured him fresh coffee. Another neighbor introduced him to a young couple who had recently moved nearby. No one made a dramatic speech. No one treated him differently. They simply made space for him. Watching that small moment almost brought tears to my eyes. Kindness doesn't always arrive with loud applause. Sometimes it arrives with an empty chair waiting for someone who thought nobody remembered them. As the sun began setting, golden light covered every open yard on our street. Children laughed together. Parents exchanged recipes. Dogs rested peacefully beside picnic blankets. Standing in the middle of our front lawn, I suddenly realized something extraordinary. I hadn't thought about building a gate for months. The fear that once followed me everywhere had quietly disappeared, replaced by trust built through hundreds of ordinary moments. Before everyone went home, Sarah gathered the neighbors for a group photo. As we smiled toward the camera, she said something I'll never forget. "A neighborhood becomes a family one conversation at a time." That sentence instantly became my favorite line in English. Later that evening, after uploading the photo to the community group, I noticed one final message waiting for me. It wasn't from Sarah. It wasn't from the neighborhood association. It was from someone I had never met before. The message read, "I watched your family today. Thank you for reminding me that open hearts still exist. Tomorrow, I'd love to tell you my story." I stared at the screen for several seconds. I had a feeling tomorrow's conversation would become the most meaningful chapter of this entire journey. The gate I never needed. The message from a stranger stayed on my mind all night. Thank you for reminding me that open hearts still exist. I couldn't stop wondering who had written those words or why my family had made such an impact on someone we had never even met. The next afternoon, I discovered the answer, and with it came the final lesson of my journey. I had spent months believing this story was about a house without a gate. In reality, it had always been about the invisible gate inside my own heart. And the moment it finally opened changed my life in ways I never expected. The next day, I met the sender at a small coffee shop only a few minutes from our neighborhood. She introduced herself as Grace, a woman about my age with a gentle smile. "I've been thinking about moving here," she admitted. After my divorce, I stopped trusting people. Yesterday was the first time in years that I saw neighbors laughing together without pretending. Her honesty surprised me. She wasn't searching for a perfect house. She was searching for hope. We talked for nearly an hour. She told me how loneliness had quietly become part of her daily routine. I listened without trying to solve her problems. Sometimes people don't need perfect advice. They simply need someone willing to listen. Before we left, I shared one sentence that had become my favorite piece of English since moving into this neighborhood. Home is not where walls stand. Home is where kindness stays. Grace smiled. I'm going to remember that. Watching her walk away, I realized something beautiful. Months earlier, I had been the one quietly wondering whether I belonged here. Now I was encouraging someone else to believe that she did. On my way home, I passed the little free library where this chapter of my story had changed so many times. I returned the novel I had borrowed and placed another book inside for the next reader. Tucked inside the cover was a handwritten note. May this story bring you peace. It felt like the perfect way to continue the kindness that others had shown me. Psychologists often describe trust as something that grows through repeated positive experiences rather than one dramatic event. Looking back, I understood exactly what they meant. My confidence had not appeared overnight. It had grown one smile, one conversation, one English phrase, one shared meal, and one act of kindness at a time. That evening, my family gathered on our front porch to watch the sunset. Children rode bicycles down the street. Neighbors waved while walking their dogs. Someone across the road played soft country music. Nothing extraordinary was happening. Yet everything felt extraordinary. My daughter quietly leaned against my shoulder. "Mom," she whispered, "our house feels happy." I smiled. It does. She looked toward the open lawn stretching to the sidewalk. Do you think we'll ever build a gate? I looked around at the place that had slowly become more than just a neighborhood. No, I answered with complete certainty. Because the safest home isn't the one surrounded by the tallest fence. It's the one surrounded by people who truly care. She squeezed my hand. At that moment, I realized the title of this story had finally become true. My U.S. house has no gate. And for the very first time in my life, I truly felt free. If this story helped you practice English while reminding you that kindness can still change lives, I hope you'll carry one simple phrase with you today. Trust grows one small moment at a time. Maybe that's the easiest English sentence to remember. And perhaps the hardest lesson to forget. That's all for today. I'll make many more stories like this in the future. Please subscribe so you won't miss the next one.